Hey guys, this is Ashton again, and today we're in my new shop and we're taking a look at my 1970 Ruffian Mustang. So I guess going this way, these are projects that are in progress right now. The 1964 Galaxy chassis on the fab table and the 69 Stingray, and again a new chassis here, C6 suspension, ZR1 carbon ceramic brakes, twin turbo motor for this car. So that one's going to be a beast. It's about 1100 on pump gas.
1100 on pump gas.
Yeah, and more with race fuel.
That's crazy. What about those guys right there?
So there's a LSX 454 that's going in a Superformance Grand Sport Corvette, so a C2.
And this guy right here?
This is my girlfriend's race car. When we do autocrossing events and stuff, this is what she likes to drive. This is a Caterham. It's a 420R. So it's a NA 4-cylinder Durotech, about 210 horsepower, weighs 1,200 pounds. And this is the one that I like to drive. It's a BAC mono, and it's a 2015, so the first year. 285 horse, same weight as the Caterham, 1,200 pounds. The steering wheel is removable, and so they have a nice bit here, Alcantara cover there for your steering wheel. There's no door or anything, obviously, and the seat is right below you, so you just gotta step over, step on the seat, kind of hold yourself up, and then drop yourself down into the cockpit. This is my Trans Am race car. It's got a NASCAR motor in it, like 800 plus horsepower. A little small block in it, runs on 110 race fuel. And then this is my Super B. It's an A12 clone, so it's not a real A12, but it is a real 440 six-pack car. It's a lot of fun to drive. This is my Gas Monkey car. People will recognize it. It's Hellcat powered Dart, and it's the one that Gas Monkey drag raced against the Roadkill guys. And then this is a CUDA I bought. The motor's no good in it, but it's rust-free, and it's gonna be a future Ruffian build, so it'll be wide-bodied, and probably gonna do like a 9-liter NA Viper motor in it. This is a McLaren 765 LT, and I just love the way the car looks, and I love the simplicity of the interior and all the carbon fiber and the vents and all that kind of stuff, so it's inspiring. This is my baby. This is the first car that I ever built, the whole thing from ground up. So every nut, every bolt, everything, bare chassis, all the way up. I built. The only thing I didn't do really is do the bodywork and spray the paint, you know. But I did the bodywork in the steel aspect, but not on the final, you know, shaping and stuff. So these are steel fenders. I started with steel rod, and I built basically an external skeleton on top of the original fender, and I used the same arch. I didn't want to change like the side profile of the car as far as like when you're looking at it, like the wheel arches, what it looks like. So I built steel rod cage on top of that, and then I covered the cage with masking tape, and then I pulled the masking tape off and used that as a pattern for the sheet metal. Then I took the sheet metal, planishing hammer, and that's what gives it, you start to stretch that metal more on the inside than on the outsides, and that's what gives it this arch. It took me 8 hours to make the fender flare fit, you know, from cutting it out of sheet metal, planishing hammer, to get it to fit to the car and tack weld it in place. 8 hours per fender. But then there was a lot of work. I mean, beyond that, you've got to finish welding it up, you've got to sand the welds, you've got to cut out the inside fender, clean all that stuff up. And then I came back and added these vents, which was a whole separate pass. I designed this recess to go along with the Boss 302 style stripe package. And the Boss 302s, the black stripes on the sides were reflective. So I used a 3M reflective vinyl to put these on. The 427 badging and the vent inserts are 3D printed. That stuff's done on my Mark Forged. And this was really a lot of just measurements and trial and error. So I'd print like a really rough vent and try to fit it in, and then I would be like, oh, it's off an eighth of an inch here, it needs to be wider, a quarter inch there. And so I printed, I don't know, 7 different versions before I got them to fit nice. So, you know, I probably have 3 weeks into 3 or 4 weeks, because on the rear fenders I had to build an inner fender well as well. So probably a month total for everything to be done. I did fit the front bumpers, and then this front spoiler I made myself, and inset the turn signal lights. The turn signals are actually from a '66 Mustang, and I inset those. And then on the sides up here besides the headlight, the Mustangs always had these cool vents, but they were fake originally back in the day. And so I made these functional, and that's where I'm pulling in air for the carburetor. It's built as really inspired by the Trans Am race cars from the late 60s and early 70s. And Ford actually published a manual back in the day that was like step by step how to convert it to a race car, a Mustang into a race car.
Oh wow, really?
Yeah, and so I bought that manual and I went through those steps, and I did like the stage 3 like race car conversion on this. So a lot of the technology and stuff, this is very old school. Still has a carbureted motor in it, still has a solid rear axle. It's a Watts link in there. Does have nice coilovers. You know, the technology aside from that stuff is all kind of old school. You know, my take on it was I still wanted it to feel like an old muscle car when I drove it. So this is an LS3. A lot of people are gonna get upset, but.
Did you say?
I did. So I really wanted to keep the shock towers in the car as part of the vintage look. And the only way you can fit a modern Ford motor in here is if you cut those out. So I really wanted to keep them, but I wanted a lot of horsepower and I wanted it to be lightweight. So I went with an LS motor. It's an LS3. It's 625 horsepower. It's pushed back about 2 inches from the original motor's position, and then it sits about an inch lower in the chassis. You can see the air intake tubes. So these are inline air filters. On the exhaust setup, I was inspired again by the race cars. So 69, 70, the Trans Am Mustangs had side exhaust. I think they just did it to have less weight and less going over the rear axle and stuff. It's just simpler. So that's what I went with. So I actually have mufflers on there, but I have cutouts that bypass the mufflers and go straight out the same exhaust tips. So for the Ford guys out there, I did think about running a Coyote, and I would have if I could have fit it between the shock towers. But the issue for me is, you know, the dual overhead cam on those motors make the top of the motor so wide. They're wider than a big block motor was back in the day. So you have to cut out the shock towers, and I really wanted to avoid that. So this is something that I guess you wouldn't necessarily notice by looking at the car yourself, but from the back of the shock tower through the front and then out of the radiator core support, I took an inch out of the front and dropped it down. So the fenders came down, the nose, the top of the hood comes down, everything comes down 1 inch. So if you look at the race cars, they look more aggressive than the street cars. And one of the reasons is because the nose slants down a little bit. So on the interior, Cobra seats, these are FIA approved. The interior is, you know, very Spartan, very race car. Autometer gauges, super cool. I know this is not Ford, this was kind of a Mopar thing, but I love the pistol grip shifters, and so I had Jake Palm make one of those for the Mustang to match the wood grain on the steering wheel. Just kind of a cool retro vibe. Switch box in the middle, AccuSump, and my electronics mounted in the rear along with the fire suppression system. The cage was built off of the old Trans Am specs. I pulled a lot of inspiration from other race series like NASCAR. So in NASCAR, they run the fuel lines inside of the body through conduit. And so that's what I did under the passenger seat here, these tubes. Inside of those are the braided steel fuel line. So they're protected from road debris, but if there is a fuel leak, it goes outside of the car instead of in the cabin. So there's just a lot of really cool race car touches. So inside the trunk, we have a 22-gallon fuel cell. We have a differential cooler and an electric pump for the diff cooler, and then a lightweight Braille battery. And from inside the trunk, you can see the underside of the fender flares. So like I said, it was all steel, wide body stuff. I made this myself just out of pieces of aluminum. I wanted a spoiler in the rear, something quite aggressive, because again, I autocross, so it's slow speed stuff. So it's basically, based off of a gurney flap, where it's just a vertical flap at the end. The bumpers are stock bumpers, but then I had to take them and I cut them down. Usually these fit and they stick out the side, they hang out the back, they're really loose fitting, originally back in the day. So I took 1.5 inches out of each side, and then I added some material up here and snugged everything up, so closed the gaps a little bit. I didn't get it too crazy. Like I still wanted the car to be believable, like you look at it and you think it's a Mustang, like it doesn't look like somebody did something super crazy with the fitment of the bumpers. So these vents, they only were on 69 Mustangs and not 70s, but I really like the style, so I added them on mine, but it's all handmade. But I made mine functional because, again, I don't like fake vents. So as you saw, I have the oil cooler in the trunk. So these push fresh air into the trunk, and then I've got some vents on either side of the fuel tank that let the air out. So for wheels and tires, these are Signature 1 series wheels. They're flat gunmetal center and gloss black hoops. So the color is 1976 Porsche olive green. I saw it on one of the earliest Singer Porsches. They had a green with red on there, and I just really fell in love with those photographs and that color, and it took me a lot of digging to figure out what it actually was. But I like the non-metallic paint, just the solid color, and it's a little bit weird. Sometimes it looks almost like olive green, like military, if you're outside in bright sun, and then inside sometimes it looks very rich. So it's an interesting paint. Ruffian came from, I wanted to name the car when I built this. I wanted to give it a custom car name, and I was thinking it's a race car, and it's also a Mustang, so maybe there would be a racehorse in the 70s that had a cool name. And I came across one called the Ruffian, and what I liked about that name was ruffian is sort of slang for like a hooligan or a criminal or somebody getting into trouble, troublemaker. And because I was wide bodying the car and because I was putting an LS motor in it, I was doing a lot of stuff that was upsetting people, like purists, So I felt like it was a really good fit for the car, and it really stuck, and now it's kind of become the name on the GT40 as well.